Our next presenter is an entrepreneur and an author of a rather new book called New Startup Mindset, 10 Mindset Shifts to Build the Company of Your Dreams. She's currently building her second startup called Adnexi. It's a strategic intelligence platform for the next generation of biopharma treatments. And prior to that, she was the founder and CEO of Seeker Health, a breakthrough digital patient finding platform, which accelerates drug development and commercialization for biopharmaceutical companies. She has an MBA in marketing and entrepreneurial management from Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. She's completed the UCLA Anderson School of Management Corporate and Government certification. She's featured contributor at Thrive Global and Hackernoon. And we are honored to have her today on our own Your Future webinar. So please put your virtual hands together, even though we can't hear you, for Sandra Shpilberg.
Thank you so much for that, Ben. I'm so happy to be here. I'm going to share my screen here so I can share a couple of slides to guide the talk. Delighted to be here and talk about how to own your future, which is really the most important thing that you could do for yourself. Own your present, own your future. So what I want to talk to you about today is my startup story. Some startup myths that get in the way for many of us with starting and growing our businesses, and how to break free to actually own your future. So let's go right into it. So what's a startup? A startup is a human institution designed to deliver a new product or service under conditions of extreme uncertainty. And I highlighted extreme uncertainty because today we are all under conditions of extreme uncertainty. So no matter what you're doing, you are working at a startup, right? We are all under these conditions of extreme uncertainty. And so what that means is that we have to act fast, we have to get information from the market, and we have to take the right step. So there's a formula out there. I don't know if you noticed, but this great show, Silicon Valley on HBO, they do a really good job bringing satire to this formula that we see out there for startups. And the formula sort of says that you have to be male, likely Caucasian, Asian, or Indian. You're probably going to be a programmer. You're young. You're going to say yes to a co-founder and yes to venture funding. And you're going to try to build a unicorn, right? A unicorn or nothing, basically. So if you don't see yourself in this formula, can you drop me a little word in the chat saying, I don't see myself in this formula? Because you know what, the truth, I don't see myself in this formula. And yet I have been able to not follow that startup formula and build a company that had revenue, had customers, was profitable, and then eventually got acquired. And so I want to tell you that story, mostly so that you see a different way that this can get done and that this can turn out for you and for anyone else that is working alongside with you. So I built this company called Seeker Health. Seeker Health was a patient finding platform. So we found patients for clinical trials for biopharmaceutical companies, right? So this is a business to business type of startup. And I love B2B startups. Why do I love B2B startups? Because generally you need just a handful of customers to pay enough to sustain the company, right? And that's actually a really good test of your idea, right? Are you able to find 3 customers that will pay you a significant amount of money to use whatever service or product you have to offer? And so I built this company this way. I did not take outside funding at all. By the time I sold the company, I owned 100% of the equity. And that was because instead of taking outside funding, I looked for customers. I looked for early paying customers, first offering what I call a minimum viable service. Back then, it was these Facebook and Google advertising campaigns that were compliant for finding patients for clinical trials. And then very quickly that grew into an entire software platform. I didn't hire an expensive team. I didn't hire these adults in the room, you know, that want to get paid $200,000, $300,000. No, not to that. I hired instead blank slates who can learn the business and serve our customers in the best possible way. I used the revenue that was coming from these customers to pay for the software development, so I didn't have to go raise. And I ran a profitable company from year 1. We had profit year 1, we had a lot more profit year 2, and a lot more profit on year 3. And I focused exclusively on acquiring customers and improving the ways that we could serve them. I'm also not the formula. So I didn't follow the formula, but I know I'm not the formula. I'm an immigrant from Latin America. I'm a woman. I'm not a programmer. I started my company at 39 years old, not 23. And I'm a wife. I'm the mother of 2 school-age kids. And I know myself that I do need 8 hours of sleep per day. I like to live a life where I get that amount of sleep. And so that's the thing, that I didn't follow the formula, and I'm not the formula, and yet the company still grew. The number of customers went up, revenue went up, profit still went up. It all went up and to the right, like we like to say in startup land. And then in 2018, I received 3 offers to acquire my startup. All these offers came from very large companies in my industry that were looking to build in this direction. And, you know, for them, sort of the trade-off was, well, should we buy a company that's already built this, or should we build it ourselves? And one of the things that really, I think, made the difference in my company being attractive to acquirers was the fact that we were profitable, that if they acquired our company, this would be an accretive transaction, meaning we would add to the profit of their company, not subtract from it. And this, again, shifts the formula, right? Because a lot of the formula in Silicon Valley is raise money, spend all that money, raise more money, spend all that money. Well, how about we get early paying customers, they pay for us to continue to build and grow, and then we still have a profit, right, that we can show for our effort. So I ended up taking door number 3 over here, and my company was acquired in September 2018. I stayed on for a while to integrate the company, and then I decided to write this book. And I decided to write this book primarily because as I built the company, I realized that I was doing things differently than a lot of the people were, especially here in Silicon Valley, which is where I live, right? People would always ask me the same questions, right? How much funding did you raise? None. Who did you raise from? No one. And then how many employees do you have? And I would say, as few as possible. And so I realized that I was quite contrarian, and that there was a new way, a different way to think about how to start a company and how to grow it, and then eventually how to realize the value of what you built. And so one quick thing that I want to tell you is that this book today is free on Amazon on Kindle. So if you want to go get it, you can just go to Amazon and search the title of the book, New Startup Mindset. And the book is completely free today, only today, July 9th. And it is because I'm celebrating the 3-month birth of the book being out there. And so I think so far you get from me that you don't have to follow the formula, and you don't have to be the formula to own your future, but there are myths that get in the way. And so part of what I do in the book is clarify what these myths are and then dispel them. So I'm gonna pick a few, just a few, 3 of the many myths that I talk about in the book. So the first myth is unicorn or nothing. This is the myth that unless you have created a Facebook or a Google, you are nothing and your company is nothing. And as you know, nothing can be further from the truth, right? There are many companies that are built that do not reach a valuation of $1 billion, and yet they are delivering a good service or product to their customers. They're making an impact, they're making revenue, they're making profit, they're employing people, and they're paying bonuses. And all of that are things that we did at Seeker Health, and we were not a unicorn. So I like to say that right under unicorns, you have gazelles, lions, giraffes, elephants, and all sorts of really well-fed, valuable, and real animals. Myth 2 is that you are your startup. And this is important to dispel because we usually think, okay, Elon Musk is Tesla, right? And Sarah Blakely is Sphinx. But you're not your startup. You're a human being, and your startup is something you work on. And you might work on it for 1 year and be done with it. You might work with it for 3 or 5 or 10 or your entire life. But it's important to break this myth, because should your startup fail, it doesn't mean that you do, right? You move on and you work on the next thing and you get up and you try again. So you're not your startup, you're a human being, and your startup is something you're working on for an impermanent period of time. Myth number 3, you need a co-founder. And co-founders are really popular here in Silicon Valley. However, there are some really great studies from the University of Pennsylvania that show that actually companies with a solo founder outperform those with a co-founder. And to me, this makes sense because a startup requires very quick intervention. There's a lot of quick decision making that needs to be made. And when the monster has two heads instead of having one, that becomes more difficult, right? So one monster with one head then can decide which direction to go with the startup. And myth number 4, you need venture capital. A lot of companies raise venture capital and a lot of companies don't raise venture capital. And many of the companies that don't is because they figured out a better way to fund their companies. The way that I funded Seeker Health, as I noted, was through early paying customers. And I am a huge fan of getting those. They validate your business. They tell you more about what they need so you can build in that direction. And they pay you for the service or product that you're providing. All right, so I want to now go into a couple of the mindset shifts that can help you begin to shift from this place of, you know, I'm not ready, I don't think I can do it, all of these barriers and obstacles and fear that many entrepreneurs and aspiring entrepreneurs face, to a place where you feel like what is happening is perfectly okay. This is exactly how it is supposed to go. And the first mindset shift is called beginner's mindset. And this is the concept that is perfectly okay for you to be a beginner at your startup, right? When I started Seeker Health, I had done a lot of things prior to Seeker Health. I worked at biopharmaceutical companies and, you know, I talked to a lot of those customers, but I had never incorporated a business or filed a trademark or filed a patent. I'd not done none of that. And so the beginner's mindset is saying, you know what, there is a benefit to being a beginner. And that benefit is that, one, you're more patient, more curious, more humble, but also you're a bit free of expectations. Nobody expects me to know how to file a patent. And so I am going to go figure out how to do that in the best possible way. And so this comes from the book. And I say that if you think you need more experience before you start, then try understanding that the most relevant experience will be to begin and then to continue working on your startup. If you believe that failure is embarrassing, then try reframing that failure as an opportunity to learn, get up, and keep going. And if you desire to be honored for your past expertise and accomplishments, recognize that those are the raw material that you're bringing to your startup. And if you hear a voice that says you're not good enough, then talk to this voice and tell them, you know what, I'm just getting started. I'm a beginner here, so check back in a year and I'm gonna show you, you know, what I've been able to do. Now, I'd love to hear in the chat from you, what is stopping you today from starting or from growing or from taking the next big step? And it's not that I want you to focus on the negative, but I want you to see it, because the minute you see what is stopping you, you can then disarm it, right? You can then work on it. The second mindset shift is single deep focus. And this was super important for me as I built my company. There's a distraction monster out there, right? Lots of little things beeping our way. And so sometimes it's very difficult for many of us to concentrate. And yet the vital organs of a startup, they need our attention like we need air. And so in the book, I talk quite a bit about how to tame this distraction monster, how to become super focused and create these periods of single deep focus, right? We can't sustain that single deep focus all day long, but we could definitely do it for 2 hours when we need to work on that pitch deck that's going to go to 10 customers, right? And so those are the types of activities that really benefit from this single deep focus. And then finally, the last mindset shift I love to invite you to enable for you is to welcome difficulties. In the startup way, in the startup land, right? Difficulties are just the hurdles along the path. They are normal, they are expected. And even these closed doors, they show you the way. They show you where the water is flowing and where the water isn't flowing. And maybe you should just back up and go in a different direction. And so the concept here is to welcome, right, all of these. In the book, I talk a little bit about distinguishing between an obstacle and a closed door. And it's a bit of a deep topic, but it helps because obstacles generally help you become stronger and acquire a new skill, right, that your startup needs. While closed doors are more of a message that is telling you it's time to redirect, it's time to take a step back, pivot 90 degrees to the right and go in that direction where there aren't any closed doors. So there's a lot more of this in the book, but the key concept is these difficulties are completely expected, right? And I wrote about this because as difficult things were happening in my startup, I would often get off balance. And then I realized that they were happening pretty much every other week and that I should stop getting off balance and instead I should stop working with them. Is this an obstacle that's going to make me better and it's going to make our startup better? Or is this a closed door where I just need to say, you know what, market's not ready in that direction and it's going to take a tectonic shift for me to move this door, but the market seems to be ready in this direction, so I'm going to go there. Perfect. So with entrepreneurship, I think a lot of what I hear from other entrepreneurs, people who've read the book, is that many times what stops them is this fear. It's like a very, very deep fear. It's a fear of failure. It's a fear of success. It's a fear of losing money or making too much money or hiring the wrong people or lots of fears. And I want to ask you that if you need to be afraid of anything, then channel all that fear into the enormity of what is possible, right? You can create a company, you can do it on your own terms, and you can be very successful and make an impact at the same time. So with that, I'd love to open it up to questions and answers. I think Ben is going to help me with that.
I'll do my best.
Great. Perfect.
Yeah,
so,
guys, if you want to throw them in, I know there's a few questions already, but if you got more, line them up and we'll knock them down. I do just want to remind everyone, you already mentioned, but what's the deal with you guys? We can get your book for free today?
That's right. That's the deal. So today only, July 9th, because we're celebrating the 3-month anniversary of the book, the ebook format, right? The Kindle format is free on Amazon. $0. Just today until 11:59 p.m. Pacific.
I like $0. We won't ask for the business model around how you're making money.
Yeah, books is a whole different thing.
Of course. There was a question from the beginning. It was talking about when you were starting your company, and you mentioned that you focused exclusively on acquiring customers. There's curiosity about what worked and what didn't in that process.
Yeah, great question. I tried a lot of things in that process of customer acquisition. I first started with my connections because this was a B2B business and I was building a solution for a problem that I was actually quite familiar with, and I had connections in the industry that could be my buyer. So I started with those connections, but then, very quickly went through those. And so the things that really worked for my business were conferences, which of course now in the time of COVID-19 are much more limited, but conferences where I would get a speaking spot, I would get 10 minutes to describe what our solution was. And then immediately after the conference, I would be approached, by 5-10 people who were interested in learning more. I would then schedule a demo with them and then try to close them, right? Bring them into the sales funnel and close them. Number two, the thing that worked as well was content marketing, right? Very specific content that I wrote for LinkedIn, that I recorded in podcasts. I didn't host the podcast, but there was a podcast host and I was talking about the content that I was interested in talking about. And those have worked very well in terms of bringing in new leads.
Yeah, that's great. It's interesting, that first point I think has been brought up by a couple of different speakers today about just maximizing the potential of your contacts, reaching out to every single person you know. I've heard that a few times today, so definitely something important to take away. Another question on here from Devin. How did you know that was the idea that you wanted to start? How did you know that?
Yeah, the great question. So let me take you back. So this is like the year 2015. I'm working at a startup biotech company after working at a medium-sized biotech company for 9 years. So I worked 9 years at this company called BioMarin, medium-sized. Then I went to this tiny startup, and this startup really struggled to enroll patients. I couldn't find them. And yet I knew that the patients that we're trying to find were online. I couldn't find good vendors. to help me with this. I wanted to buy the system that I ended up building, and I couldn't find it. And then it ended up happening that startup, that biotech startup, decided not to continue to pursue that drug. And so I was actually out of a job. Like, I actually got a severance package, 4 months paid or whatever. And I said, you know what, this is my sign. One, I have a really clear need in the market where I wanted to be the buyer and I couldn't find it. It doesn't exist in the way that I wanted to buy it, so I can build it. And then two, this company is giving me a couple months of salary runway so that I don't have to worry, right, for the first 4 months as to where the income is going to come from, right? I have 4 months to get customers. And so that really helped. But that's how I knew. I sort of took those two signs as like, when else am I going to have as much certainty and as much sort of like forward motion to go create this thing?
Yeah, fantastic. This one, it's more of a comment than a question. It's actually an answer to your question before about what's preventing people. I'm just curious what your take might be. It's from Tammy, who's, I know she's been with us all day. So thank you, Tammy. It's been a long day. She says, what's preventing her is choosing a business niche that resonates with her new values. She said she's already had a long career in real estate, investing, financial markets, but none of that matters to her anymore. She's trying to find a new place to land. I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on something like that?
Yeah, I'm kind of getting chills as I'm reading that, because that totally resonates with me as well. Obviously, like, one of the business niches that is easier to choose is something you've already worked on, because you can benefit from the connections. But if that isn't going to speak to you, if that isn't really aligned with what you think you need to be doing with your life, then don't do it, right? And then go into that new area, go into those new values that become important and resonant right now, and then begin to make the connections, right? I think you'll be surprised, like, how quickly you begin to form something new, around something that you never knew anything about. And the example I want to give you is, I was running a startup, but then I also wanted to write a book, right? And I ended up writing this book, and I had to go into this whole thing of like publishing a book and promoting a book and, getting on podcasts and whatever it might be, right? But this was something that I felt really strongly about. And when you do, then you begin taking the right steps for the right things to appear, right? You begin seeking, you begin finding. And as you do that, it doesn't matter that you haven't had a long career in this area. You can begin to pull it together.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, what's the oldest thing we've heard since we were kids is do what you love and the money will come, right?
Absolutely. Yes. And I mean, you have to be savvy, right, about it. Like, you have to have that disposition. I think that's one of the things that really helped me with Seeker Health, right? That I was coming from the business side. So I always had a disposition of, look, I don't want to run a company that has a loss every year. That's just like doesn't make sense to me. I'm a business person, like, a company is revenue minus expenses equals profit. And there should be some profit to show at the end of the day. So of course, like, there's a way to arrange that so that is the outcome.
Yeah, for sure. There's an interesting question that came in from Eric, kind of on the other side of the table here. He's asking if there's any advice for someone who is winding down an unsuccessful startup, just to avoid feelings of defeatism.
Yeah, I hear you, Eric. A lot of startups fail. And I think the best advice that I can give to you is what myth number 2 was all about. You are not your startup, right? Your startup was there to provide a product or service to a market. And there are a lot of aspects there that we don't control. Right? We don't control exactly how the market is going to receive that product. We don't control the circumstances that we live in. Like right now with coronavirus, right? A lot of budgets are slashed. A lot of difficulties are there in terms of making sales or getting traction for companies. And so all of that, Eric, you don't control. And therefore, I think it's good to have that, kind of that inner sense of, here's the pieces that I could control. I tried my best. I gave it a shot. And these were the pieces I couldn't control. At the end of the day, it didn't work. And that's okay. Here's what I learned. Here's maybe what I would have done differently or not. Maybe there's nothing you would have done differently, but just kind of take your time to cleanse all that out, right? So that then you can be ready to start working on something new.
Yeah, that's really good stuff. Let's jump back to growing businesses opposed to declining ones. Aaron I was curious about, again, about customer acquisitions. That's something you were focused on. He's curious how long of a window you might expect to acquire your first 3 customers. How long is too long?
Yeah, how long
You
is too
give
long?
up.
This is really more relevant for my second startup, because the first startup was a little bit quicker. Like just within the first month, I had one customer that it looked like they were going to come on board. That kind of kept me really motivated to go get a second. It depends, right? I would say in general, like 3 to 6 months, depending on your tolerance, right? Depending on your tolerance for 3 to 6 months of not having revenue, and also depending on what market you're working in. If you're working to bring in like infrastructure type of software into big companies, those sales cycles can be a year, right? But if you're looking to bring in something that a person should be able to decide yes or no, within a couple of days or a week, then you would give yourself a shorter period of time. But I think as a guideline, I would say, like, for me, 3 to 6 months, I need to see some signs of life, right? If there are no signs of life, then either the product has to change, our differentiators have to change, something has to change, because we tried it for 3 to 6 months and no one's buying anything.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. Another really interesting one just came in from Ruben, definitely specific to you. He says, I'm a Mexican American. He's curious what roadblocks, if any, you've experienced as a Latina in the business world.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I came to the US when I was 16. So I think I had the opportunity to get my college degree here. And, all of my work experience has actually been here in the US. So I feel like I came kind of like early enough to erase most of my accent, kind of like I'm Americanized in a way, a little bit. But I think some of the roadblocks are real. I saw a lot of that with my parents. My parents came to the US in their 40s, and to this day, my mom has a very thick accent, and people react differently to you. Like a little bit of an accent like I have is like kind of cute and interesting. Oh, where are you from? But like when, yeah, it's kind of interesting to be aware of how people react. For me, mostly, I think my approach has been, I know I don't fit the mold, but I don't need to throw that in your face every single minute. And so to the extent that I can, speak in the most professional way, dress in the most professional way while still being me, then that's kind of what's been my approach. So I think there's been, I think with the business, I don't think that I felt as much discrimination at all from being a Latina. This is my husband's last name. So it also kind of like, Sandra Shpilberg. I mean, that doesn't sound Latina at all. I think to some extent there was a little bit more about being a woman, right? And being this like woman CEO, I was running a multi-million-dollar company and kind of like making sure that people were going to take that seriously. Like I wasn't creating this like lifestyle business that I do from my couch, right? Like this was a real thing. So I think I struggled more with that and making sure that people were going to take me seriously in that regard.
Yeah, great one. We only got about, 90 seconds or so. So I'll ask you one last question. It comes from Hari, I believe is how you say it. This was, again, an answer to you asking why people are having a hard time kind of getting to it and starting something. And they say they're overwhelmed by the landscape. And their question is, how do you focus?
Yes, great question. It's very common to be overwhelmed by the landscape. I have a whole chapter in the book about talking to your competitors, because one of the things we're most afraid of is our competitors, how many of them there are, how quickly they're evolving. And I think it's okay to feel overwhelmed by the landscape, but it's also okay to understand that good companies are targeted companies, right? And so, for example, I didn't start a patient finding platform for any disease under the planet. I started a patient finding platform where our customers were mostly biopharma companies developing in rare diseases and in cancer. And why? Because that was the area of the market that was underserved. And that was the area of the market that was growing the fastest, right? So that's what I would tell you. If you're overwhelmed by the landscape, like who else is in here, then maybe try to find areas that are growing the fastest, areas that are underserved, areas where you have a differentiator. You're bringing something that is going to be very good for that niche. And I think that one of the previous speakers talked about niches. Niches are really important. Like all the big companies started by serving one piece of the market really well. That's how success is built. choose a small piece of the market and serve it perfectly.
Yeah, fantastic. Amazing. We're unfortunately out of time, but I could talk to you all day. You've got such a great perspective on this. Everyone, don't forget Kindle Store or Amazon, wherever you go to get your Kindle books, New Startup Mindset. It's free today, or go tomorrow and spend some money on it, because that's even better for everyone.
Or you can buy the paperback or the hardcover.
Or buy the real book, and then you've got it forever. You can read it 100 times plus. Thank you so much, Sandra. It was fantastic.
Awesome. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers.